Could you imagine if instead of Led Zeppelin, they had called themselves... Hey everyone, and welcome back to the fastest growing channel between me and my best friends. They don't have YouTube channels. My name is Paul Collins, and this is The Artist Project, the show where I review a musical artist, talk about my experience listening to them, and give you my recommendations of what I think you should listen to. This week, Led Zeppelin, and if they lived up to their potential as a band. Back in 1966, a young guitarist by the name of Jimmy Page became the lead guitarist for the Yardbirds. After a few more successful years as a band, they eventually split up, but they had a few shows left to do in Scandinavia. Jimmy Page decided he was going to recruit a few guys to go with him and was recommended Robert Plant, a singer who was only 20 years old at the time. Plant had formerly sung for Band of Joy and brought on drummer John Bonham to join them as well. To fill out the rest of the band, John Paul Jones, a friend of Jimmy Page, was brought on to fill in as bassist after inquiring if there was space within the band. Little did they know they had just put together one of the biggest rock bands of all time. They played the shows in Scandinavia under the name the New Yardbirds. They instantly showed signs of chemistry, putting together incredible music in just a short amount of time that they'd spent together. Due to legal reasons, they had to change the band name from the New Yardbirds to something else. When Jimmy Page was actually a part of the Yardbirds, somebody had told him that the band was going to go down like a lead balloon, really meaning they weren't going to be popular at all. Somehow they got the idea that Lead Balloon would be the perfect name for the band. Could you imagine if instead of Led Zeppelin, they had called themselves Lead Balloon? That probably would have gone down something like... Okay, one other person worth mentioning is the band's manager, Peter Grant. He was kind of known to be a guy who could get what he wanted. He got Led Zeppelin an advance contract worth $143,000 with Atlantic Records, which in today's money is worth about $1.2 million. This set the record for the biggest deal for a new band ever. Peter Grant, as Led Zeppelin's manager, revolutionized the music industry by renegotiating contracts to give artists greater control and a larger share of profits, leading to the establishment of the Led Zeppelin Clause, allowing artists to have final say over touring and recording. Grant's advocacy for artists' rights shifted the power dynamic between musicians and record labels, setting a precedent for future generations of artists to assert greater control over their career and earnings. Led Zeppelin's first album was self-titled Led Zeppelin and was released on January 12, 1969. It peaked at number 10 on the Billboard charts. Over the next few years, they released their next few albums. They released Led Zeppelin I, Led Zeppelin II, Led Zeppelin III, and Led Zeppelin IV. Actually, Led Zeppelin IV didn't have a title, but Led Zeppelin IV. These albums all topped charts, their concerts became infamous, and Rolling Stone even called Led Zeppelin the biggest band of the 70s. You had Robert Plant on vocals with his wild screaming and his dynamic range. John Bonham with his thunderous drumming and insane fills. Jimmy Page on guitar with the crazy style, always coming up with new sounds. He was actually very influenced by Jimi Hendrix. If you want to learn more about Jimi Hendrix and his guitar style, go ahead and click the video I made about him. And finally, John Paul Jones, who came up with just the most creative bass lines and later was known for his melodic keyboard ability. By this point, Led Zeppelin was big. They were known for having revolutionized rock music and are called one of the inventors of hard rock. Jack Bruce of Cream, when asked about the invention of heavy metal, said, "Don't blame us, hang that one on Led Zeppelin." Comment below who you think invented hard rock and heavy metal, because it is pretty heavily disputed. Led Zeppelin's first 4 albums were enough to solidify them as a band and send them into infamy, right? Wrong, they kept going. Arguably, this is when their creativity started to peak. They released Houses of the Holy in 1973, Physical Graffiti in 1975, Presence in 1976, and In Through the Outdoor in 1979. All 4 albums peaked at number 1 in the US and the UK. Some people say that Led Zeppelin hit their potential early on as a band. Was that true, or were they just beginning to hit their creative peak? More on that later, but let's continue on with the story. On and off stage, Led Zeppelin was wild. They were always known for, wait for it, drugs. John Bonham drank a lot. Jimmy Page did heroin a lot. And they all did cocaine a lot. As has happened to many rock stars, it led to the demise of John Bonham. He unfortunately let the drinking get the best of him, and after reportedly taking more than 40 shots, died from asphyxiation from his own vomit. This is where it gets interesting. After his death, the band released a statement signed by them saying, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were. Without Bonham, they chose to be done, and each took off in their own directions with solo careers." What a tragic end to a relatively short life of a band. This really was the end of Led Zeppelin as we know it. Now, let's get into my experience listening to Led Zeppelin. I grew up listening to the Mothership, which is a greatest hits album, and Led Zeppelin IV, and felt like I had a pretty good understanding for their ability as a band, but I was definitely proven wrong. Listening to Led Zeppelin I and Led Zeppelin II, especially in the context of where rock was in the late 60s, blows my mind. As a kid, I didn't realize how early on their music was, but it's crazy to see how much they revolutionized the sound of rock music. It was interesting to see how the music evolves through their later albums as they bring in more synthesizers, slowed down the sound a bit, and lost a bit of that raw edge. But it still is really good music. Some of my favorite stuff comes from their later albums. Now, after listening to all of their music, here are my recommendations of what Led Zeppelin music you should listen to. If you've never listened to a second of Led Zeppelin music in your life, just start off with one song. Please, I know for you true fans, you're gonna hate me for this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Stairway to Heaven, just go listen to it. It's an 8-minute ballad. It shows off the musical talent of each of the 4 members of the band, and it's just incredible. It's legendary. Go give that a listen. After that, I would recommend A Whole Lotta Love and Over the Hills and Far Away. It really just shows off Jimmy Page and how incredible of a guitarist he was. If you're looking for album recommendations, their by far most popular album was Led Zeppelin IV, the Untitled album. It's incredible. It's got some great hits, including Stairway to Heaven, which I already mentioned. But if you want my favorite recommendations, I would listen to Led Zeppelin I and Led Zeppelin II. It's raw, it's incredible, and songs like Dazed and Confused just still blow my mind to this day. If you're just looking for a greatest hits album, I would recommend The Mothership. Like I said, I grew up on that album, and it gives a great overview of some of their best music. I'll make sure to rank each of my favorite albums below as well. In addition, as always, you can find the links to my Apple and Spotify playlists that cover my favorite songs, all compiled into one short playlist just for you. So, such great music from such incredible instrumentalists. And then their drummer died, and they broke up. They called it quits as a band. Now let me address the question. Did Led Zeppelin live up to their potential as a band? You know, there's a lot of bands with a clear prime time when they're creating their best music ever. And then as they keep producing music over their years, it's just clear that their creative juices have run out, or their ability to produce just isn't there. Other times, their musicality improves, and even after slight dips, they can make strong comebacks. Some examples that come to mind, Bob Dylan or Johnny Cash. Some look at Led Zeppelin and argue that their early music was their best and that they could never top it. It was just so innovative and new that they could never beat it. Some, including some of the band members themselves, argue that Physical Graffiti was some of their peak, with the most creative and diverse sounds all compiled onto a double-length album. Personally, I think that Led Zeppelin had more to come. Listening to what they were doing by the end in 1979, I still think they had more creative juice in the tank, and there was more where that came from. They were still putting together great music by the time John Bonham died, and that's why I think Led Zeppelin did not live up to their potential as a band. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in 2 weeks when I discuss one of the most incredible folk duos of all time. My name is Paul Collins, and this is The Artist Project.